It's probably, when I think back over the 7 or 8 years that we've been doing this, we try to, over time, through our study of the industry and of clubs and of data and of just talking with so many clubs, really try to be innovative and come up with notions that are illuminating about clubs and provide tremendous value to clubs when they put a little bit of emphasis on the things that we discover. And this is one that my partner Ray Cronin we've been rolling around in it for a while, but has really put both hands around, and we're trying to wrestle this to the ground, and we think there's tremendous opportunity in this particular topic in changing the dialogue in clubs and moving the dialogue to the ultimate strategic discussion, and certainly away from the tactical operational discussion. So what we're going to talk about today is what we're calling net worth in clubs. Obviously, the notion of net worth, I'm sure, is familiar to everybody on the call. We all individually, personally, have net worths, some higher, some lower. We all aspire it to be higher. Companies have net worths. Nonprofits have net worth. Clubs have net worths. We'll talk a little bit about more what that means, but we're gonna really talk about today why understanding your club's net worth and the trajectory of the net worth, why it's so vitally important, and why it's extremely telling about what's really been happening at the club, and telling about the financial trajectory and financial health of the club. So that's what we're going to talk about. Today should probably be unlike most days where I go over the 30 or 40 minutes we profess to take up. This one probably will be right in that 30-minute zone. While it's an extremely important topic, and we're going to definitely spend some time on it, it's one that's pretty easy to grasp, and we're going to have only a few numbers to look at, not a whole lot of numbers to look at. So I think we'll be pretty much on time today. The goals for today's session, and ultimately everything we do, is about trying to explain the business. I believe it's all our responsibilities for those that are on the management side of clubs, or I'll call us the consultant side of clubs. It's in our responsibility to be able to explain the business, and this one falls directly into that topic set. I think there's probably also a number of board members on the call today, and this fits, you'll resonate hopefully with this discussion of how it fits directly into, frankly, what should be being discussed in the boardroom. Today, in talking about net worth, we are going to use that term to really help define that measure around what it means for a club, and whether it defines whether that club is growing or shrinking. Just like all of us personally, individually, we hope that over time our personal net worth grows, and we can make judgments about, over time, if our personal net worth grows over time, we can make a judgment about the trajectory of our financial strength. At the same time, if our individual net worth shrinks over time, we can also make a judgment about that, and I think it's pretty clear which trajectory you'd prefer to be on. Nobody really wants to have a shrinking net worth. We all want to have, as we get older and move through our lives and careers, we want to have a growing net worth. More assets, less debt, more net worth. Same thing for clubs, so we're going to talk about that. And we're going to look at individual clubs, and we're going to look at the overall industry to a point. I guess it's not really, the next bullet isn't really a goal. I guess I would contend that there is a blind spot in the industry around understanding, even thinking to look at the concept of net worth in a club. Ray was at the NCA conference, I think it was in DC. It was earlier this week. He was giving a presentation. It was around this topic. There were a couple hundred GMs in the room, and he asked the question, how many of you know what the net worth of your club is today, or this year, or what the trajectory of your net worth of your club has been over the last several years? And out of the 200 people in the room, one hand went up, literally 1 out of 200. And so while the value of having this discussion and talking about this, I think, ultimately is in the boardroom and keeping them focused on what really matters, we are all also culpable in the fact that we're not putting these things in front of the board and helping, use these things to explain the business of the club. So we are as responsible for having the board not look at this particular area as they are for not looking at it. And I think that was a little bit of a proof point. It's not, I get it, because the industry's never looked at these things, but there's no excuses today because we are looking at these things. And so, how do we impact a club's net worth over time, right? You can't impact, just like you can't in one fell swoop unless some windfall comes into play. You can't impact your net worth individually, personally, in one shot. It's typically a series of decisions over a number of years that move you up the net worth curve. It's the same thing in clubs. It's not a silver bullet. It's the blocking and tackling and asking the right questions over time that gets you there. So the scenario we're dealing with is just sort of for you to ask yourself, does anyone in your club know the net worth of the club and if it's been growing or shrinking over time, right? That's the scenario, and I'm going to guess. I think I know what most of the answers are, but I can't answer it for you. Maybe some of you do know. And just to help the terminology a little bit, in the nonprofit world, it's really, the term is unrestricted net assets. We're using the term club net worth just because it's a little bit simpler to say, but that's really what we mean. And any one of you in a not-for-profit club can look on your balance sheet, can have your controller. They may have to add a few numbers, or it may be a standalone line item. Ask them, what is our unrestricted net asset value? In fact, in preparing for this webinar, we sent out a note to the folks that were registered at that time saying, hey, do us a favor, just as some data for this particular discussion, send us your net worth. I think we asked for over the last 6 or 10 years, the unrestricted net asset value of the club. And we did. We got back about 50 or 60 sets of data. I appreciate that. And we're going to take a look at some of that. And we have been working with some clubs specifically on this. So that's what we're going to look at. But that's the scenario we're painting. And I think, to me, I think there's tremendous opportunity. We all know that boards get stuck on the wrong discussions. And there is tremendous opportunity, because I do think, especially if they're business people, this is really easy to grasp. And it's really easy to grasp if it's been ignored, of why it's important and why it's not a good thing to be ignored. This is just something I saw today. There's a lot of words on this chart. I apologize for that, but I was poking around a little bit today, just putting together some of the final slides, and I came across this website. It's called nonprofitassistancefund.org. I think there's a number of resources. They sell, I think, various books. They might even have a consulting arm. I'm not quite sure, but there were a couple really interesting things that I thought applied. As I read one particular page, I felt like I was reading about the club industry. So I thought I would just grab a couple of those things. And every piece of this text is right off of that website, which I found very interesting that it hit the mark so closely. The one question, it was sort of kind of a problem statement for what they were up to. So why do board members miss the financial red flags, which we know is a huge problem in this industry? We know that there are clubs struggling deeply today, and either they don't know it, or they're mired in things like food and beverage and the cost of food, when they've missed these massive financial red flags, right? They think the red flag is the cost of food went from 40 to 42%. That's not the red flag. The red flag is the net worth of the club has gone down by 40% over the last 4 years, So, it was interesting, very apropos. Boards pay too much attention to income statements and budgets. We hear that virtually every day, and every management person, club management person on this call will resonate with that. Income statements are great, budgets are great, and they're great for tracking, their revenue and for expense control, but it looks at an extremely short period of time, right? It's a 1 year, maybe a 1 quarter, maybe a 1 month snapshot. It's a very short period of time over the lifespan of something like a club. We know, again, text right off the website, boards don't pay enough attention to balance sheets. The balance sheet is a long-term view, right? It's the cumulative effect of everything that the club has been doing, all the combined financial activity of the club over a large number of years, and is completely representative of the financial health of the club. Just like our own personal balance sheets, we all know people that make a lot of money but are always broke, right? Their income statement wealthy, but their balance sheet poor, right? That's actually not wealth. Real wealth is balance sheet wealth, right? When your balance sheet is healthy, whether you're a company or a person or a club, that's what gives you flexibility to weather the bad times, to invest, to make decisions that maybe take on debt, right? The things that a healthy balance sheet gives you flexibility, whether you're a person or whether you're a club. And so healthy clubs build up on the balance sheet, build up assets and cash reserves and unrestricted net assets. Unhealthy clubs have diminishing levels of cash, insufficient working capital. They actually pull their restricted funds and divert that to current operations. Sometimes they have very low levels of diminishing unrestricted net assets. It's pretty unusual. We've seen a few. It's pretty unusual for a club to have a negative unrestricted net asset value. We've seen a few. It fundamentally means that the club is insolvent. I just think nobody knows it yet. But it's clear, and I'm taking a little bit of time on this. But these are the red flags. These last things I mentioned. These are the red flags that should make a board member jump up and down, right? Say, look at this. Our net worth is decreasing, right? We're stealing our capital. We're stealing our cash. They don't. So the income statement, I like this phrase, the income statement, that has the opportunity to show you yellow flags. And those are indications of, wait a minute, slow down, what's happening here, right? Things like operating deficits so that you have to steal capital. That might almost be a pink flag. I'm not sure it's only a yellow flag, but, or things that would give you, correlate to an operating deficit, right? Would cause you to slow down and look and say, what's actually happening that our operational revenues are not covering our operational expenses? The red flags are on the balance sheet, and those are we got to stop what we're doing now. We got to look. We have to understand what's happening. And I am contending today that the notion of net worth is one of those flags that's either red or green, and we'll look at some examples of both. In terms of, we're gonna approach this a little bit from a perspective of time frame. We talked about the income statement being a snapshot in a short period of time, balance sheet looking over a long period of time, and obviously you want to have a little bit of both. And a lot of you, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but you've heard me talk about the net available capital ratio. That is the annual perspective of what was the impact to the balance sheet, right? What was the opportunity for impact to the balance sheet? And that ratio is simply the term not without the I, normally it's EBITDA, but earnings before taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's net of operations, net of capital income, and net of leasing expenses. It's the relative amount of money the club piled up for either capital investment, debt reduction, or increasing your cash reserves. And we know it's been quite consistent for several years that the middle of the industry is about 11%. So if you're a $10 million club and you're right down the middle of the industry, you produce 1.1 million of net available capital. And when we look at the numbers, we kind of assess and we look at the clubs that are on net worth growth patterns versus level patterns versus reduction patterns. Our assessment is that clubs that are in this 12 to 15% range year in, year out are the clubs that have the opportunity to grow their net worth over time, right? It's the capital-rich clubs. Not surprisingly, we'll look at it, but capital-rich clubs are the clubs that tend to have increasing net worth over time. Capital-starved clubs are the clubs that tend to have the decreasing net worth over time. Well, it'll become obvious in a minute, but we'll look at that a little bit more. Let's take a specific example. This is the next two clubs we're going to look at are actual clubs. I'm not going to tell you the names. There is a club that we've worked with closely, and he's very kind to let us share his name and the club name. And if any of you know John Schultz from Carmel Country Club, I would encourage you to reach out and talk with him, because he is a prime example of the positive things that can happen from a club that's in a positive investment cycle and in a growing net worth cycle. Not only has the net worth of the club increased significantly over the last 5 or 6 years, the initiation fees have doubled, both in terms of how much a new member pays and in how much initiation fee income they're getting. And the net worth of their club has looks like a curve, much like this club, where it's gone up significantly over time. This club in the last 5, 6 years has a net worth that's gone, it's a big club, but it's just, the same thing applies. It's the slope of the curve that's important, not the actual number. This club's gone from an $18 million net worth to a $23 million net worth. Pretty significant. It's almost a third, 30% increase over the span of 5 or 6 years. Literally the asset value of the club, assets minus liabilities, that the net asset value of the club has gone up by $5 million over that period of time. Now, ultimately, you get there because you've moved money from your members onto the club's balance sheet, right? It essentially came from member balance sheet to the club balance sheet. But the way you can pull that off is by actually doing things that members find valuable, adding facilities, growing facilities, making investments, whatever it might be. You'll have to figure that out for your own membership. But that's the way you ultimately build the net asset value of the club, or the net worth of the club. And this is what a healthy club that's on a great trajectory looks like. The counter to that, and that's a capital-rich club. The counter to that is a capital-starved club. And here we can see the net worth of the club is actually diminishing. They did have some come to Jesus recognition moments a couple years ago, and they're starting to make some changes to at least change the trajectory. They have a lot of work to do, but at least it's not decreasing anymore. And so what happens in these clubs where it's capital starved, the depreciation level of the current asset base is actually shrinking. It's depreciating quicker than capital is coming into the club. Obviously, it's a pretty simple equation. If your depreciation is higher than your net available capital, we'll have another slide on this in a minute, you're going to have a diminishing net worth of the club. That's as simple math as you get. And so the point is, every club on this call, if you haven't already done it, you can take the last 10 years of your unrestricted net assets, throw it into Excel, and put it on a chart, and within the span of a half an hour, you're going to know whether your net worth of your club is increasing, like this club, decreasing like this club, or maybe it's just flat. It's not increasing, and I would contend that while being flat is certainly better than decreasing, it's not really the objective, right? Just like we want our own net worth to grow individually, the national GDP, wants to grow, the size of the economy wants to grow. I think every healthy club, every healthy organization, you don't stay healthy by staying the same size. I'm a view of any entity is either growing or shrinking, and certainly you want to lean towards the growth side. But it does mean that capital income is coming in, and it's being invested in ways that reinforce that ongoing every year increasing capital income, increasing initiation fees. So if we look at the clubs that we collected data for, the 50 or so that supplied us some data for this, this is kind of plotted. All we did was take the first year of their net worth that they supplied in their last year. Each one of these bars represents a club, right? And we said, well, over that period of time, what's called CAGR, right? Cumulative annualized growth rate. So you take that change over that period of time and say, well, what would the annual growth rate be to have gotten from the start of that to where they are today, right? It just annualizes that number. And what we see is, of that 50 or so clubs, there are 32 clubs that have a growth rate, in other words, their net worth had a growth rate at least 0 or greater than 0. So it was a positive growth rate. Their slope was up and to the right, varying degrees. But there are 17 clubs that had a negative net worth. Their net worth over those period of years, and it was typically we got 6 to 10 years worth, actually shrunk. That's pretty shocking. That's 1/3 roughly of the clubs actually had a decrease in net worth. They shrunk, as in the value, the net worth of the club shrunk over that period of time. Now, I can pretty much guarantee there's not a single person in that club or a single person that was on the board in any one of those 6, 7, or 8 years that knows anything about what the net worth of the club was doing. If we look at the sort of the overall range, the median club, so that middle one that fit, the one that fit right in the middle, had a net worth growth rate of 1.7%. Still pretty low. I mean, it's better than shrinking and it's better than flat for sure. But that's sort of, if you just think it's kind of keeping up with inflation, it's kind of just doing that. So almost from a perspective of net of inflation, it's sort of about the same. The 25th percentile was a negative 0.6%, and the 75th percentile had a growth rate of about 4% and above, those clubs. So there are, those that about a quarter of the clubs are growing in that 4, 5, 6, 7% clip, and there were a couple clubs that have made strategic, meaningful investments over those period of years, and effective investments, because what you see is the growth rate of those, and remember, growth rate means ultimately you're bringing in capital into the club. It's not just it's not just replacing depreciating assets. You're actually bringing in new capital, and not just debt, because remember, debt's got a balance of the liability on the other side of the balance sheet. This is true net worth we're measuring here. But you can see there are clubs that have 8, 10, 14, 15, 16% growth rates. These are the clubs that are really strategically investing in themselves. And you can see that there are some clubs that are really shrinking at a fairly alarming clip. And knowing where you are is the first step here. Now, obviously there's going to be a huge disparity, just like there are in companies, although I would say that clubs should be somewhat more consistent. A company like Apple, you see very high growth rates, very high level investments. A company like Walmart, which effectively is a measure of the economy. It doesn't grow organically very much. It just sort of does what the economy does. I just threw those in there as interesting measures, but obviously benchmarking against what the club industry does is really the most valuable. But the only way you can significantly increase your net worth is with significant increases of capital income, which is why when clubs make decisions to chop their initiation fees to zero or to something low, or to diminish their initiation fees, they're absolutely shooting themselves in the foot, because they're precluding their ability to invest in the things that members will find valuable, which will then lead to increasing net worth over time. It's just it's a bad pattern that we see a lot. This is really the same set of data. We're not going to look at it too long, but it's all of the years for all those clubs plotted. And as you can see, there are some clubs that have made the strategic decisions. 100 just means level here, means equal net worth. So if they're above this 100 line, that means their net worth is growing, and the line represents their year-by-year growth, and below the line means a shrinking net worth. But you can see there are some standout clubs that really have embraced the notion of invest in the club, drive up initiation fee rates higher, drive up initiation fees higher, justify bringing in more capital assessments because you're investing in things that clubs want. And that's, very simply, that's what drives that net worth up over time. But you got to know where you are, and you have to know what your trajectory's been. I'm not going to spend really time on this. This is just obviously initiation fee clearly is critical to this whole discussion. Capital-rich clubs have initiation fees that are significantly higher than capital-starved clubs. You get into a chicken and the egg here, for sure. The clubs that have high initiation fees and become capital rich, that becomes a self-sustaining model. And the clubs that are capital starved and have diminishing facilities and net worths, it becomes hard for them to justify an increasing initiation fee, and they get stuck in this pattern of low, no initiation fee, capital starved, let's just keep tamping down expenses, and it does take, frankly, a bold move to try to get out of that cycle. It requires investment to get out of that cycle, because that's the only way you can justify increasing initiation fees and resulting in higher capital income. So ideally, every club shouldn't get complacent with your initiation fee. Ideally, I know this is somewhat, I said ideally, theoretical, but it's real too, because we see the result of clubs that act this way. Both the initiation fee and initiation fee income should be increasing over time. And if it's not at your club, the strategic question is why, and what are the things that we could actually do that would justify us increasing the initiation fee and thereby increasing initiation fee income. I do believe initiation fee is predictive we haven't done all this work yet, but I would say I think it's predictive of the trajectory of your net worth. I kind of like this one ratio. It's your initiation fee as a percentage of what a full member pays for dues. And we can see about a quarter of the clubs have initiation fees that is less than 1 year of dues. And you have about a quarter of the clubs where the initiation fee is more than 6 times what the annual dues is. And when you look at the clubs in this domain versus this domain, and you look at the net available capital rates, and you look at the member counts and a number of other things, we haven't done a net worth trajectory of those yet, but I know where it'll come out. It really is something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. People view initiation fee, in struggling clubs, people view the initiation fee as a burden, as a hurdle. In really healthy clubs, they view it as as lifeblood to their capital income, and it's not. It has to always be looked at that way, not as a burden. All right, I got to keep moving along here. So this is there's a very simple way to assess what kind of trajectory you're on, right? If you think about the net worth of the club being in the middle of this tug-of-war. On one side of the rope, that would have been a good picture actually, to have a rope with a tug-of-war. On one side of the rope, you've got the depreciation of your current assets, right? The things that the club currently owns depreciate at a certain rate depending on what it is, and that's pulling down the snapshot net worth of the club. You have the net available capital, which, as we defined earlier, is the capital's coming in, the net capital coming into the club every year, and that's got to at least, at a minimum, counterbalance that depreciation. And then, of course, your initiation fee income and capital assessment income is the monies that come in for that more aspirational, typically that more aspirational investment. Now, there are times where net available capital is very high and very capital rich, and you're able to not only cover your depreciation, but you're throwing significant money away as cash reserves for future investment. But these two things are pulling in opposite direction. So if your net available capital isn't at least as high as your depreciation, by definition, the club net worth is shrinking over time. So those are pretty simple things to take a look at. For meaningful net worth growth to occur, basically what we're talking about here is money has to be, the club has to position a value proposition such that members are willing to give you cash off of their balance sheet and move it onto the club balance sheet. That's really the only way that the club ultimately garners a growing net worth, is by taking that capital away from your members. And of course, it's really up to the club, the board, the management to some degree, but I'm going to probably put it on the board more so, because they need to be the owners and protectors of the balance sheet. And so, that growing balance sheet, by taking that cash from your members off their balance sheet, is, it's got to be managed appropriately regarding investment, regarding asset management, regarding value creation, and ultimately net worth growth. And there are a number of clubs out there where, frankly, the membership doesn't trust the board, and the board has not done a good job in these things. But I would hypothesize that every club, regardless of what's happened in the past, has the opportunity for a board to start presenting themselves as, we are the keepers of the balance sheet, we are monitoring net worth of this club, and we are going to start making the decisions that bring us down the path of net worth growth, not shrinking or even flat. And that transfer, you can only do that through, it's trust, right? It's a trust thing. You have to justify assessments, higher and higher initiation fees through investment and increasing member value, investing in the things that members say, I find value in that. And I would ponder more so towards what your prospective members and new members see having value than the members that have been there for 40 years will see value in, because we all know, we've been around long enough, that those are two very different things. Just very quickly, if we look over time, this is an indicator to us that the industry has gotten healthier overall as an aggregate over the last 6-7 years, because we look at the net available capital ratio, and it's actually been increasing over time. It's plateaued around 12% at the median of the industry, but 4, 5, 6 years ago, it was down in the high 8s or maybe right at 9%. Now, it's a third increase from here to here. So, the point is, if your depreciation was at 10 or 11%, at 9% you're shrinking, at 12% you're at least not shrinking anymore. So, there is, clubs tend to dance on one side or the other of zero around profit or loss and growth or non-growth. So a few percentage points can make a big difference. In fact, interestingly, I forgot I had this chart in, right? So if we look back at 2011, for example, net available capital ratios at the middle of the industry, 8.7%, depreciation, 11.8%. So the industry, as an aggregate entity, was shrinking, we know, because the amount of net capital coming into the club was 3 points lower than the depreciation. Depreciation is pretty level, right? So it's still around 11%, but the net available capital ratio at least is up at that level. So it's at least supporting the other side of the rope in that tug of war. This is, I won't go into this. I've been through this before. It's an interesting chart. Some of the other webinars we use it, but the clubs that are on a net worth growth trajectory are in this green cycle, where there's increased investment, which broadens facilities and values, which drives demand, meaning higher initiation fees and higher initiation fee income, which generates more capital income, and you just stay on that wheel, that investment and increasing capital income wheel. And the club that I showed that had that sloping up net worth, that's exactly where they are. They've got that higher and higher amounts of capital income has increased the asset base of the club by a tune of $5 million. The other clubs, obviously, capital starved, diminishing, lowering satisfaction and demand, lowering initiation fees, lower capital income, meaning no investment, and you got to get off this cycle. And every board, by looking at that net worth value over time, I really hope that everybody on this webinar, when they're done, takes the half hour, has their controller pull together their unrestricted net assets for the last 10 years, put it on an Excel chart, and just look at the slope, and start to internalize that a little bit yourself. And we were happy to help you figure out how to bring it into the board, but get that note to the board. Talk to people like John Schultz. Sorry, John, I don't know if he's on here or not, but I'm volunteering him. But he's a great guy. He's happy to help. Talk to people that that are on those great growth curves, and you got to get the board focused on the balance sheet and off of the income statement. It's a dangerous path to go down, and it's a path that many clubs are on. So I hope that this was interesting, and that everybody will in fact leave this and say, I wonder what the heck the net worth of our club has been doing. If it's going down, it's not something to hide behind, because frankly no one has looked at these things before. This is new. This is sort of breakthrough interpretation, breakthrough analysis, and a club that is on a diminishing net worth, there's only so long that can happen before the value proposition has been so diminished that it can't make the change. Most clubs that have a few years of diminishing net worth can make the change, but you have to recognize it. So it's about creating awareness, and it's getting that board to be focused on the balance sheet and net worth just like they would be personally or for their own companies. You know, I know we can't cure cancer in a day, but one of the ways I'm convinced the way we get boards off of what they shouldn't be talking about isn't by just saying you shouldn't be talking about that. It's by bringing in these are the things that really are high value to talk about, right? No one. I got to believe that there 99% of board members. If you said which is more important, the trajectory of net worth of this overall club or the cost of food, I really hope that at least 99, maybe I hope 100, would say the net worth of this club is more important. So that's how we shift the discussion, is by bringing in the important things. And I do believe that management and boards are both responsible to the point of the tests we do where we say how many of you know your net worth, and people don't know because they haven't looked at these things. It's not anybody's fault. It's just we haven't looked at this before. We're breaking new ground here. So with that, I really do thank you. I have a couple closing points here. We, as we always have, are continuing to do industry data collection, and we're going to continue to write, it's not going to be called the CMA report, but continue to write an industry-wide annual report for both finance and ops and comp and benefits. So many of you have still been supplying us data, even, I mean, if you're not a subscriber. So I am really asking for the folks that aren't subscribers and still want to help us do the things we do, just like we're seeing today, and participate, is go to this link if you haven't already done so. We make it really simple. There's no manual data entry. All you have to do is give us your trial balance file. If you can go to this web link and supply your last year-end trial balance by June 15th, we really hope, I'm really asking, you'll help us get more and more data, and we'll continue to be able to do these things whether you're a subscriber or you're not a subscriber. As you know, all these things we do are for anybody and everybody. We're here to help every club of all sizes and types. I would say if you're not a subscriber, think about it, because it's hard to be a prophet in your own land without a good, independent, validated set of data. I'm not going to make this a sales pitch, but you know, you certainly know a number of folks on the team to contact us and talk about you know what it all means to be a subscriber. For the code word for the CMA chapters, it's Sequoia. I used something that the Evergreen folks might have near and dear to their heart, but any of the chapters that might have set that up can use that code word. With that, I'm going to see if Terry had any questions that came in, and I'm going to turn it over to her and let her ask those questions and see if we can come up with some answers.
We do have several questions. The first question is your formula for calculating net worth utilizing the gross value from the depreciated value on balance sheet or from an appraised value?
Oh, that's a great question, and boy, I don't know the answer to that. Our guy Jim Boyle, who's an expert club CFO, has been working with all the controllers on that. I could hazard a guess, but it's, well, ask that question again, please. Is it depreciated value or assessed value?
Is the formula for calculating net worth utilizing the gross value from the depreciated value on a balance sheet or from an appraised value?
Oh yeah, no, it's not an appraised value. Yeah, no, it's a balance sheet. It's a balance sheet value. Yeah, I had to listen to that again. Yeah. No, it's not. I mean, obviously, appraised value can have some other notions, and we are using a balance sheet depreciated value, and that's why every club, you have these items on your balance sheet. Your controller, and it's not even an equation. It's an addition of items, right? But your controller for every club can come up with that unrestricted net assets because it is a balance sheet item. Exactly.
So the next question is also a good one. So what is the alternative to a board that disregards the implications of the balance sheet and income statement?
You know, I would say it's education, and because You can't force it down their throats. You have to get to someone. I mean, it's always good to find someone who's a champion. I mean, if you've got 13 on your board and 13 out of 13, are putting their head in the sand, it's pretty rough. If you have a couple that are open-minded and want to understand and not just assume that they have the answer, bringing in data from us helps. Again, not to be a sales pitch, but subscribing to us helps, and we help pick the right data to help convey the message into your board. Ultimately, they have to self-realize by making it painfully obvious that what they're looking at aren't the strategic things, and that there are strategic things that are critical to look at. So, whoever sent that I'm happy to have the discussion with you individually, because I always like to say, tell me exactly what's going on in your board and what are the dynamics, and then we always figure out a way to get around that. So it's a little hard to answer generically. Those discussions are a little bit easier to have when they're specific. So whoever that is, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to try to help out.
Okay, next question is, what percentage of operating revenue for the successful club? And it was early on in the webinar.
Well, I'm assuming you're referring to it's not about net worth to operating revenue, right? That's not really, clubs with more revenue tend to be the ones with more net worth, but from I'm assuming you mean net available capital. And maybe the question was before I got to that slide, but that net available capital at the middle of the industry is 11 to 12%, and where our position is that 12 to 15% of operating revenue. It's not coming from operating revenue, but it's just relative to the size of operating revenue, that at the end of the year, your net available capital, which does have an equation behind it, is 12 to 15% of your operating revenue, and that's a number that generally means you're covering your depreciating assets, and you're either have enough to reinvest in the club or pay down debt, or are putting money in the bank, and it's that delta over covering your depreciation that by definition is the change in the net worth of the club, right? So you've got net worth, it gets depreciated down each year, and then you have monies coming in to counter it. So whatever that net available capital is on top of the depreciation number is that shift in net worth. If you're not covering depreciation, your net worth is shrinking that year. If you have $1 million more than your depreciation, your net worth went up by $1 million. Any other questions?
Yes. Have you noticed differences between city athletic clubs and country golf clubs, given that the initiation fees are often less in city athletic clubs?
Yeah, it's a good question. Ray might have looked at that. I haven't looked at it yet, so I don't have an answer yet. It's an excellent question to see how have these net worth trajectories. Well, I can say conceptually it's still the same thing, right? The values may be different, but conceptually it doesn't really matter what kind of club you are. You still frankly obviously don't want a shrinking net worth, and you want an increasing net worth. So in that world, of course, he's not just a city club anymore, but you look at folks like Jeff McFadden at Union League Philly. Clearly, that club has had significant increase of net worth over the years, and they've done that through getting more capital out of their members, off their members' balance sheet into the club, and then investing those things into things. So none of this really matter. It's really the same exact thing, whether you're a city club or a golf club or a yacht club. You still need to understand what has been the trajectory of your net worth, and what are we doing to ensure that that's actually increasing over time through the increase of capital income coming into the club. The net available capital numbers, those median numbers, do tend to be a little bit lower than they are for golf clubs by, I think, 3 or 4 percentage points. Whoever asked that, if they're a member, Obviously, we can run that data right out of your account. If you're not, you want to see how it all works, we can look at that too. Um, but the numbers might vary a little bit. But again, this whole thing on net worth, you're looking more at the slope of the curve over time. Obviously, you're going to make decisions within a year that over the span of several years has the impact on the slope of the curve. So A, what's the slope of the curve, which means what have we been doing in the past, and then what are the decisions we make if we need to change the slope, to change that slope. And that, we're not talking about instant decisions. That can take a couple years to have an impact.
Okay. Next question. Would the unrestricted net asset value be essentially the same thing as total member equity? In other words, total assets minus total liabilities.
It should be, yes. Yeah, so it would be the equivalent of like an owner's equity. Yeah, so it would be the same thing. And again, same thing, you'd want that to be increasing over time.
Okay. This is in two parts. If you're using depreciated value from the balance sheet, that doesn't reflect market dynamics impacting the actual value of the club? Wouldn't it make sense to have the club appraised regularly to ensure the use of an accurate and timely gross value?
You could. I mean, I suppose if you thought you had some undervalued assets, I don't know. Uh, Obviously your buildings depreciate, your equipment depreciates. I mean, the land value might appreciate. So I guess if you had some assets that you thought were undervalued and actually did, significantly increase in organic value, that you'd want to use whatever process you needed to not write down but write up the value of those things. Of course, that also will depreciate or increase your depreciation levels in the coming years, because if you move something with a value of $1 million to $2 million, obviously the lifespan of that thing hasn't changed. So depending on the lifespan left, you will increase the depreciation over those remaining years. So there's a couple different parts to that, but yeah, you could. I mean, the intent of the balance sheet is that it's an accurate reflection. I would say generally that's probably not the realistic way to have an increasing net worth over time, but my view would be the only real way you get increasing net worth over time is by bringing in capital income from your new and existing members. That's the meaningful increase in net worth, because that's also what allows you to invest in different things. If you own something and the value of that went up, maybe you can borrow against it, but other than that, just because that thing went up in value, it's not allowing you to invest in other things. So it's really the capital coming in that's the meaningful change in net worth, if you know what I mean.
Okay, and the follow-on to that is, would it also not make sense to evaluate potential improvements or upgrades for their contribution to the gross value of the club? Simply spending money doesn't add value.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Simply spent, no doubt about that. I mean, it's what we're talking about. When I talk about John Schultz or the curves we looked at, you're investing in things that have value. I mean, frankly, I'll give an example we see all too many times. We see a lot of clubs invest in significant increases in their, let's say, banquet facilities. I mean, I'm just going to hit on that one because it's an obvious one. We hit it all the time, with the view of this is going to have a return on asset and a return on investment, and it's going to generate revenue and all those things. Of course, it never really returns the return on investment, but at the same time, it also is not an investment that has significant member value associated with it. So I have a little test. When someone tells me we're making a significant investment in the club, I always ask, is that going to allow you to increase your initiation fee? And if the answer is no, then I have to ask, well, is that really something that has member value associated with it? Because if you're investing in something that has member value, you should always be looking at, we're moving, it doesn't matter where it is, right? We're moving it from 5,000 to 10,000, from 50,000 to 65,000. And the clubs that invest in things that have member value use that as justification to increase their initiation fee over time. It's clearly not just about spending money, absolutely. It's about spending money on the things that your prospective members and current members find valuable and are willing to pony up more money to become a member, and are willing and are you're developing a culture where they trust that assessments pulled from members are spent on things that generate value, which makes it easier to get the next assessment. So it's definitely not about whoever is asking those questions. It's great. I mean, you're asking great questions, and I would actually love to have a conversation with you one-on-one because you've obviously done some thinking about this. But it's not just about spending money. It's about investing, and you can invest wisely and you can invest poorly, just on anything in life. Yeah, that's part of the whole deal for sure.
Okay, so I see a couple of hands raised. I think we're coming up on an hour here. I would suggest that maybe the best way to do this is to have, if you have additional questions, to email those to rconde, RCONDE at clubbenchmarking.com, or give us a call.
Yeah, it's great. By the way, I love all the questions. Frankly, it's a sign that we've hit on something interesting here, and I think it's inspiring a lot of thought, which is exactly what we're trying to do. So I love all the questions. We will terminate this because we're on the hour, but let's leave it at that, and certainly send those questions along, and we'll make sure we get them covered. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it, and I hope to see you all again soon on another webinar or somewhere in person. Thank you.